Vice President Joe Biden's maintaining his front-runner status with a new poll out from Reuters showing him with double the support of his nearest rival, Senator Bernie Sanders. And now Biden's Democratic challengers are looking for ways, of course, to chip away at that lead of his. On Wednesday, that's yesterday, an opportunity presented itself for that when the Biden campaign confirmed to NBC News that the former senator, he was a senator for all those years, continues to support the Hyde Amendment, which prohibits the use of federal funding for abortions. The Hyde Amendment was first passed in 1976, 3 years after Roe v. Wade, and has been attached to every health appropriations bill since then, including Obamacare. His Democratic challengers were quick to oppose Biden's position, while mostly not hitting him personally.
Things like the Hyde Amendment are attacks on women, and I will continue to fight to rip them down and empower women to have better access to contraceptive care, to health care, and the kind of things that help them live healthy lives where they control their destinies, not a bunch of politicians.
I hope that Joe Biden rethinks his position on this issue. Perhaps he doesn't have all the facts. Perhaps he doesn't understand who the Hyde Amendment hurts most. And again, it's lower income communities of color.
We do not pass laws that take away that freedom from the women who are most vulnerable. It's been the law for a while, and it's been wrong for a long time, because it really is. It's just discrimination.
Historically, senators from both sides of the aisle have voted in favor of funding bills with the Hyde language included with it. Every current or former member of Congress running for president has, in fact, voted in favor of bills that do include the Hyde Amendment. However, 8 of those members have co-sponsored a bill that would repeal it, the Hyde Amendment. For more, I'm joined by former Republican Congressman Carlos Curbelo of Florida and Zerlina Maxwell, Senior Director of Progressive Programming for SiriusXM. How does this work? Do you see it now in the next couple of weeks, even days, Zerlina, politically?
I think that this is a point of vulnerability for Joe Biden, and I actually think that eventually we may see him shift his position on the Hyde Amendment because of the pressure from the Democratic base. This is an issue that came up in 2016, and Hillary Clinton was a staunch opponent of the Hyde Amendment and was very vocal about repeal. It ultimately ended up in the DNC adopted platform at the convention because the Democratic Party right now has shifted on this issue. We understand that the Hyde Amendment essentially means that there are 2 classes of women in the United States. One class of women can afford abortion and they have access to all of their constitutionally allowed health care options. And then poor women, mostly women of color, do not have that access and those freedom to exercise their rights. And frankly, 1 in 5 American women of reproductive age are on Medicaid. So this is a lot of American women we're talking about.
Let's talk about the numbers now. Basically, I'm looking at the number here. 58% of the country at large, Democrat, Republican, Independent, 58% are against using Medicaid or government money, taxpayer money, to pay for abortions. That's a pretty decent majority. On the other hand, among Democrats, Clinton supporters, that when they did this poll, 57%, another healthy majority among Democrats, are for it. So, Congressman, what do you think of this trade-off? Because it seems like if you just look at this in political terms, obviously Biden is with a minority of Democrats. There may be 30 or 40% of Democrats who are against this funding. The whole country as a whole is, by margin, against it. What's that tell you politically as he goes from Iowa to New Hampshire to South Carolina to California?
Chris, Joe Biden is running an unconventional campaign for a primary. He is basically not apologizing about the fact that he's running as a consensus builder, as someone who wants to build a coalition to try to win in November. He's almost looking past the primaries. Now, that's dangerous. And the big question here is whether Democratic base voters are going to tolerate this kind of candidacy where Biden isn't apologizing. He's owning his positions, and he's basically announcing or making it clear that he's not going to change who he is, that he's been a deal maker his whole career. He's reached across the aisle. And I think he's signaling here to a lot of those independent voters, those swing voters, who will make the decision in November of next year as to who's going to be the next president, that he is going to govern from the middle. Again, this is dangerous. This is unconventional these days, as both parties have moved Republicans to the right, Democrats to the left. So it's a dangerous strategy for a primary. we'll just have to see if Democrats will tolerate this kind of approach.
Well, you think it'll become a litmus test, Zerlina?
I do think it will become somewhat of a litmus test. I'm not saying that people will not support Joe Biden only for this reason, but I think this goes to a litany of reasons why his candidacy is under such scrutiny, not just because he's the front runner, but he was in the Senate for longer than I was alive, Chris. And, he has a record that doesn't jive with current views on many, many issues, not just race, not just abortion, but also criminal justice reform.
Chris,
go ahead, Congressman.
Chris, I think Joe Biden's message to not just Democrats, but to the country is that he wants to win in November. And sure, that means sacrificing some of the decisions that would be made in a primary process. We know that there's a lot of pandering to the bases of each party in primaries. We've seen that a lot over the last decade. Joe Biden is saying, I'm going to be principled. I want to govern from the middle. I want to change. And perhaps the change in politics these days is to not go for the base strategy, to try to win those middle-of-the-road voters.
But what about the women who are hurt by this policy? I think that's what the conversation the Democratic base is having right now, is about who is negatively impacted by this policy. And it's women of color who are a very important constituency that Biden will need in the primary and the general.
Strong words and true words, I think. Anyway, on Tuesday, the House Judiciary Committee held a hearing on threats to reproductive rights in America. And during the hearing, the chairman of the committee, Jerry Nadler, went after a Republican member for wanting to impose, as he put it, his beliefs on other Americans. Take a look at this quote.
The rhetoric from the ranking member of the subcommittee is heartfelt and sincere. It is also arrogant that it seeks to impose his and certain other people's moral commitments on everybody else on people who don't share those moral opinions. The power of the state should not be used by one segment of society to impose its moral or religious beliefs on another segment of society.
Congressman, I think you could argue that those words could be used just as well from people who believe that abortion is wrong morally. It's a grave moral consequence to them, and they don't want their money or their government supporting it by funding it. And therefore, it's the same way you could argue a person who doesn't share in maybe evangelical or Roman Catholic belief about the unborn or the fetus life or whatever, and the importance of life. If you don't share in that, you shouldn't be it shouldn't be ignored and overlooked. This is a tricky question, and I don't think anybody can claim high moral ground when there's so much moral consequence, both sides, in this issue.
Yeah, I'm a Catholic and I'm pro-life, and I can certainly relate to that. And I think that's why so many Democrats over the years have agreed to compromise with Republicans on this issue and to say, even though we, those of us who are Democrats, support abortion rights, we will go ahead and agree that taxpayers who may strongly disagree with this policy, in my case I do, that taxpayers not be forced to pay for these abortions. So it's a very controversial issue. This has been going on, Chris, since before Roe versus Wade, the divide in our country. But the fact is, even a lot of those Democrats who today are campaigning and are criticizing Joe Biden have voted in spending bills for this policy exactly for that reason, because they don't want to impose abortion on American taxpayers.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.